In this video, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the Uniform Bar Examination, or the UBE. So first things first, when is this exam held? And the answer is twice a year. It's administered every February and every July. And more specifically, it's administered on the last Tuesday and Wednesday of each February and July. Most traditional first-time takers take the July bar examination. So now that you know when the exam is held, what can you expect from the UBE? What is it exactly? Well, as I just noted, it's a 2-day exam, but more specifically, the written component is administered on day 1, whereas the multiple choice component is administered on day 2. And in most jurisdictions, the MPT portion is in the morning on day 1, whereas the essay portion is in the afternoon. And then the MBE, or that multiple choice, as I noted, is on day 2. We're going to be talking about each one of those components in a little bit more detail. But first things first, I want to get some other basic general information out of the way. Some information that I think you should be aware of if you're considering taking the UBE or if you've signed up for it. This way you know what to expect. So the Uniform Bar Exam does not test state-specific law. And this is probably a question we get all the time. It's definitely one of our most frequently asked questions. So the Uniform Bar Examination is just that. It's supposed to be uniform, and therefore it is moving away from, or it has eliminated testing state-specific principles. So again, if you're in New York, you're not going to use New York state-specific law to answer an essay question or an MEE question. Instead, they want you to apply the multi-state rule. So that is number 1. Now, if you are answering an essay question and you've been asked to assess an issue where there are multiple approaches to analyzing that issue, and they haven't been clear about which type of jurisdiction you are in your fact pattern, in that situation, you are expected as an examinee to outline the different applicable approaches and to analyze each and to reach a conclusion as to each of those approaches. So to give you a quick example of what I'm talking about, if you are answering some sort of mortgage essay question, and let's say your fact pattern was not clear about whether you are in a lien theory state or a title theory state. What you have to do to answer that question is explain to the graders that there are different approaches to that legal issue, explain each approach, analyze it, and then reach a conclusion. The other thing to take away from the basics here is that each uniform state is allowed to outline their own parameters about what they consider to be a passing score and other state-specific information about the transferability of scores. So to put this another way, while the Uniform Bar Examination is uniform in the sense of what is tested, each state has a lot of autonomy and power to dictate what they determine to be passing and what scores they accept. Additionally, on that note, each state also has the ability to set up its own grading scale. So for instance, some states use a 0 to 10 point grading scale for the written portion. Some states use a 0 to 6 point grading scale. And if you're in New York, they even use a different grading scale. So again, while the Uniform Bar Exam is uniform in the sense of what is tested, the states have a lot of power and autonomy to actually do the grading and to determine what that means to them. So now that you understand some of the basics, let's talk about each component of the bar exam. So remember, for the Uniform Bar Exam, there are essentially 3 parts. The MPT, or the Multistate Performance Test. There is the Essay Exam, or the MEE, which stands for the Multistate Essay Examination. And then there's the multiple choice portion, or the MBE, which is the Multistate Bar Examination. So we're going to take it from the top and talk about the MPT first. And again, this portion of your exam is administered on day 1 because it's part of the written portion, and it's usually administered in the morning. But again, double check with your jurisdiction just to make sure that is relevant to you based upon where you're taking the test. So the MPT is worth 20% of your total Uniform Bar Examination score. So this is about 70 to 80 multiple choice questions. That might not sound like a lot, but it is very powerful. The MPT is a great way for you to get a lot of points. It is definitely something that you do not want to put off. If you start working on it at the beginning of bar prep, it is definitely an area of this test that can provide you with a nice point cushion. So remember, it's worth 20% of your total score. Now, if you're taking the bar examination with straight time or without any sort of accommodations, you're going to have 3 hours to complete 2 MPTs, and they give you both at one time. So this is something you want to practice self-timing yourself with. So you should be giving yourself approximately 90 minutes per MPT. Now, what is the MPT? I've been asked this question a million times. It's a good one. So the MPT is essentially a lawyerly task. And what they give you in terms of exam materials is they give you what we call a task memo, which is essentially instructions or tells you what they want you to do. They give you a fake file, and much like a file would contain at your local law firm or at your law firm, it's going to have some factual documents. It might have some court pleadings. It's basically going to give you things that will help with the facts of your case or with the facts of your lawyerly task. Additionally, because this is a closed universe exam or portion of your exam, you're also going to be given a library. And in your library, you will find the controlling authority or the law that you're supposed to be using. This could be statutes, it could be rules, it could be cases, it could be any mixture of those 3 things. As I mentioned, this is a closed universe portion of your exam, so they do not want you to apply any outside law. Instead, they only want you to be using the law from the library in which they've provided. So it's really actually a great part of your exam if you start practicing the MPTs early, because you don't have to know any outside law to do well here. So if you are familiar with these tasks and you've practiced these under time constraints, you can do really well. So as it relates to your MPT, now that you know a little bit more about what it is and that it's a lawyerly task, you are supposed to complete the task at hand. In other words, this is essentially a very involved game of following instructions. And you're following the instructions using that law they gave you and the facts provided. So the most common types of lawyerly tasks we see are the objective memos and persuasive briefs, but other MPT assignments can be given as well. So for instance, they can ask you to write demand letters or opinion letters. There's also what we call wildcard tasks or odd tasks, which could be anything from drafting a bench memo to contract provisions. So again, you're following instructions based upon what they're asking you to do. What we provided for you is our MPT frequency chart. So I just want to clarify what you're taking a look at. On the left-hand side are all of the different bar exam administrations, and then along the top of the chart or of your piece of paper are the different types of MPT tasks we've seen. So again, you can see the objective memo, the persuasive briefs, the letters, and of course, wildcard tasks. And any X indicates when that task was tested. So this is why we're calling it a frequency chart. If you wanted to see how frequent the objective memo showed up on the MPT, you could simply look at all of those X's under the objective memo heading. So now that we've covered what is the MPT and you have a little bit of a better feel for what to expect, let's talk about the other component of the written exam, or the essay portion, the MEE, the Multistate Essay Examination. So as I previously mentioned, this is usually administered in the afternoon on day 1. But be sure to check with your local jurisdiction to see if they're going to be following suit. So the MEE is worth 30% of your total uniform bar examination score. And again, this is a national test, so no particular state law applies. Your job is to apply the multi-state rules. Just remember, if there are multiple approaches to any legal issue and they are not clear about which approach you're supposed to be using, make sure you outline those different approaches, analyze them, and reach a conclusion for them. The MEE consists of 6 essay questions, and you are given 3 hours to do this. So you should be allocating about 30 minutes to each question, assuming that you're taking this exam without any sort of accommodations. Now, there are potentially 15 different essay subjects that could show up on this portion of your bar exam. And sometimes one question tests multiple subject areas. In other words, the question might cross over to another essay subject. So take a look at our frequency chart that that we've provided to you, and I want to explain what I just said and what this chart is communicating. So on the left-hand side lists those possible subjects that could show up on your exam. So again, taking it from the top, you see things like agency, partnership, corps and LLCs. You see some MBE subjects like Civ Pro, Con Law, Contracts, Crim Law, Crim Pro, Real Property, Torts. And you also see some essay-only subjects. So again, agency, partnership, corps, LLCs, conflict of laws, family law. These are areas of law that are fair game on the essay portion, but you're not going to see them on the MBE. So I like to call them essay-only subjects. So again, your testable subjects are on the left-hand side of this chart. Along the top of the chart, you see different bar exam administrations. So for instance, if you wanted to see what was tested on the July 2020 bar examination, you could look at the far end of the chart and look to see which subjects are indicated as having been tested. Finally, if a question tested multiple subjects, we also indicate that to you. Because as I mentioned, it is possible for one question to test multiple subjects. I like to call this as like a crossover question. So for example, if you take a look at the July 2013 portion of your chart, you can see that there is an X next to agency and partnership, and that is in parentheses. You can see that corps and LLCs was tested. There's an X next to that. Civ Pro was tested. There's an X next to that. Contracts, evidence, torts, and wills. Hopping back up to torts, though, you'll notice that that X is also in parentheses. And this is because torts and agency and partnership were tested in one question. So that question crossed over those subjects. It is not uncommon for the torts question to also test agency principles. So this is just one bar exam administration to illustrate that point. So moving on to day 2 of your bar exam. This is the multiple choice portion, or the MBE, or the multi-state bar examination. So again, this is a national test, so you should be applying the majority law, not state-specific law. This is worth 50% of your total uniform bar exam score. And it is a 6-hour test, which consists of 200 multiple choice questions. Usually they give you 3 hours in the morning to answer 100 questions, and then again 3 hours in the afternoon to answer the additional 100 questions. So of those 200 questions, 175 of them are scored. This means that you will encounter 25 experimental or test questions. Usually if a question is kind of wacky or odd, it's a good indicator that it is an experimental question. We always recommend you try to answer as many questions as you can, hopefully all of them. That's the best way to maximize your chances of success here. Now, in terms of what can be tested on the MBE, there are 7 subjects that are fair game, and these subjects are tested evenly. In other words, each of these 7 subjects are 1/7 of your total MBE examination. So what are those 7 subjects? Well, I've listed them for you, but just to recap them quickly: Civ Pro, Con Law, Contracts and Sales, Criminal Law and Criminal Procedure, Evidence, Torts, and Real Property. So while these subjects are tested equally, the topics within them are not. That is something that this course will cover later on. But again, all 7 are fair game. So hopefully now you have a better idea on what to expect from the uniform bar exam.